Hello, everyone. Welcome home. It's so good to have you with me. Thank you for choosing to spend part of your day with me on this Wednesday. You know what that means whenever we say Wednesday. It means it's the time for the deep dive when we go behind the headlines to fully grasp what is happening in the news. Today, we have the enormous honor and privilege of having attorney Joey Jackson here with us, criminal defense attorney Joey Jackson, who's going to really help us understand the difficulties around policing the police, the systemic problems, if you will, to use a soft word, around the criminal justice system here in the United States. We're going to go through all of that with Joey. He's going to be here the full hour. You know how this works. It's a conversation that you're meant to be part of. So get set, get your questions ready. We're going to weave them into the conversation throughout the hour. There is a lot to go through. Let's get started. All right, so let's get started, shall we? We have Joey Jackson here with us today to go through all that is happening in the news. Specifically, we want to focus on the George Floyd case, which has sparked these protests, not just here in the United States, but around the world, and talk about the road ahead for a successful prosecution and what the challenges may be, and then pull the lens out to look more specifically at the criminal justice system. Joey Jackson is here. He joins us from New York. Joey, my friend, welcome.
It is so good to be with you. You do such a tremendous job and perform such a tremendous service for people throughout the world. So it's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you, Joey. It is enormously kind of you to say that. We are tremendously fortunate to have you with us to really try and get to grips with this moment and to really fully understand the legal road ahead, and for you to put it in context from your many years working in this field as to just why things are the way they are and how they have to change. So let's start with this George Floyd case, and we all know that all the officers involved have been charged. We know that Derek Chauvin, his charges were upgraded. Initially, it was third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter, upgraded to second-degree murder, and the other three officers, Alexander Kung, Thomas Lane, Tutau, all being charged. And yet we heard from the Attorney General Keith Ellison say, basically, this is not a slam dunk. You know, this is still a difficult road that lies ahead. And I think it would be very helpful to hear from you why this isn't a slam dunk, or why people are saying there are evidentiary difficulties here.
So there's so much happening, and just to put everything in context, George Floyd is the case that we're referring to, but George Floyd is systematic and problematic of a much larger policing issue throughout the country. And so, yes, it was George Floyd this time. Prior to that, it's Eric Gardner. After that, it's Philando Castile. It's Sterling. It's just so many. And so what people need to understand is that this is not an isolated event in which people throughout our country just decided, based upon this limited issue, to start protesting and it getting, rioting to happen and cities just to ignite. This is systemic of such a broad issue. And I think this just really brought it to the fore. And I know your question is a lot more specific than that, but I think it's important that people understand the context of why people are so upset, so infuriated, and something needs to be done. We are at a critical time in our history right now with regard to America. What we do moving forward, what happened here, how is it allowed to happen, why would it be problematic for a prosecution moving forward? And so in starting the conversation, it's imperative that people understand that this was just a powder keg waiting to explode, and enough is enough because of what people saw before their eyes. And we know, Isha, what that was. We saw the murder of someone. Essentially, we looked at it and we saw it on video in disbelief. How could it be that an officer can have their knee on someone's neck for almost 9 minutes? 3 of those minutes upon which the person was unconscious. How could that possibly happen? It's part of a larger and broader problem involving the over-aggressing policing in communities of color. And it's been an issue not only in Minnesota, let's be clear, it's been an issue in New York. It's been an issue in New Jersey. It's been an issue, in Los Angeles. It's been an issue everywhere. And so this is just systematic of what people are enduring. And now's the time for reform. So to your question, the issue now is that you mentioned all the degrees of murder he's been charged with. Let's just back up for 1 second. And please stop me if you need to. Ask me to further clarify things if you need to. But everyone needs to understand. The problem people had was that they witnessed this murder right before their eyes and there was no arrest. And it begged the question of why would there not be an arrest? And let me just be clear. If a citizen does something in this country that is deemed to be criminal, and there's reason to believe that a crime was committed, they're arrested. That's the standard. Is there reason to believe a crime occurred? I don't think there's any person that has a pulse that looked at that tape that didn't get the feeling that there was reason to believe that a crime occurred. Now, we can debate whether it was a crime, wasn't a crime, the degree to which it is a crime, first degree, second degree, third degree, all of which I'll explain. But I think people had a gut feeling that something was wrong. So if I did something like that, I'd be arrested immediately. If you did something like that, immediate. And not any other citizen, immediate. Why is it that no...
Let me jump in there, because Joel Cohen, a former state and federal prosecutor, wrote for law.com essentially a piece that said he felt that it was pressure from the street and the community that forced, as far as he was concerned, a rush to charge these individuals, and saying that he felt that it was dangerous to be in a situation where the street and the community and newspaper editorialists are dictating the timing of a prosecutor's charging decisions. I mean, I found that staggering to read. I mean, put that in context. Did you feel that there was undue pressure and in the way this thing was playing out?
Here's how I feel. I feel that there are so many attorneys in the country, and everyone is entitled to their opinion, and everyone is entitled to state their opinion with respect to what they see, observe, pressure, no pressure. So in terms of Mr. Cohen, we just have a principal disagreement. Was there pressure? Absolutely there was pressure. Were people upset? Absolutely. The question that I would ask is why it had to get to that for you to move forward if you position of authority. You don't have to wait for people to riot. You don't have to wait for people to protest. You don't have to wait for people to be angry. You don't have to wait for people to be upset to do your job. Now, granted, there was that anger. I'm sure it precipitated and had a lot to do with the arrest. But my question is, why should there even be that anger? There's no rush to judgment in making an arrest. Let's just be very clear what we're talking about. Let's go back to what I said before. In the event that there's reason to believe a crime was occurred, you're arrested. The standard is not, Isha, we gather all the evidence, we look at all the facts, we look at every videotape, we interview every witness, we get every single piece of documentation. Now we're clear that we can prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, so we arrest you. That's not the standard in this country. The standard is there reason to believe you did something wrong. Now, in the event and that wrongness being criminal, if you meet that threshold, you are arrested, period. It doesn't matter if you're a police officer, if you're a celebrity, if you're an anchor, if you're a contributor, if you're a movie star. If you did something that's criminal, you get arrested. Why didn't that happen here? That was the outrage. And so that led to, and I would hasten to add, if it weren't for the community's combustible, really, reaction to this, would there even have been an arrest? Yes, we are a democracy. And people choose our elected leaders, people choose our prosecutors, people choose our mayors and presidents. But at the end of the day, my issue with Mr. Cohen's piece, this is not a rush to judgment. This is a rush to do justice. This is a rush to do what's right. This is a rush to do what we do in this country all the time, which is to prosecute people who engage in misconduct when we particularly see that before our eyes. Now, let me just be clear about something. I'm not suggesting, right, that you convict someone based upon a charge. I'm suggesting that what I saw was criminal. On not only as it related to Mr. Floyd, the conduct exacted upon Mr. Floyd by Officer Chauvin, but upon all the bystanders. So why does it take 4 days, 1, 2, 3, 4 days to make an arrest of something we all see, where if it was anyone else, they would have been arrested immediately. With all due respect to Mr. Cohen, we can debate the charges, whether they were appropriate, whether they were not appropriate, but we shouldn't be debating the fact that he was arrested and the other officers were arrested. And let me be clear about that. The other officers, it wasn't 4 days, it was 9 days. Why does it take you 9 days to arrest officers based upon misconduct that all of us see is wrong? So I just want to be very, very crystal clear with what I'm saying. In order to make an arrest, it was an injustice not to arrest them from the beginning. We have a process, and they'll go through that process. And we can now transition, as you please, into what the degrees of murder were, how they were upgraded, etc. That's an issue we can talk about, but not to arrest them for what we saw, and then for some lawyer to suggest that it was a rush to arrest them. Are you serious? They should be treated like everybody else. And therefore, if people want to refrain from making a judgment as to whether they're guilty, that's fine. But making a judgment as to whether they're arrested, that's ridiculous. They deserve to be and were arrested too late.
To that point, and first of all, let me just say to our viewers, and people are already writing in saying they are loving this conversation. Let me just say to everyone who is watching, please send in your questions. Joey's here for the hour, and it's going to be at this intensity for the full hour. So whatever you've had on your mind as you've watched conventional television, if you will, and haven't been able to get that question in the mix, this is the place. Send your questions. Joey's going to answer them directly. So get writing. Joey, as you speak about it wouldn't happen to any other person who was caught on camera, on tape, holding another person down and snuffing the life out of them. As you talk about the differences, I just want to get your reaction to the fact that after that tape was released, there was, I don't know if it was that same night or certainly a few nights after, before Derek Chauvin was taken into custody, there's the image of 75 police officers clad in black and armed and seemingly clad like riot police, but I can't speak to that, but certainly clad in black, blocking off the road to his home. It's seemingly protecting his home from the community. What message does that send to the wider community and to this country to see 75 police officers standing, protecting the home of a man caught on camera incontrovertibly with his knee on the neck of someone until they died? What does that say about policing in this country? What does that say to you about the message that sends?
I think it's a horrific message. Who are you protecting? Shouldn't you be protecting citizens that are falling dead, particularly people of color who are young and black, who are falling dead at the hands of police, as opposed to the person responsible for engaging in the misconduct to begin with? And let me just make absolutely clear what my position is. We have officers out there who are doing their job every day and twice on Sunday. I salute you. Who are protecting communities, who are respecting communities, who are courteous to people who they're arresting, and who are interacting with communities in a favorable way. Let me also tell you that my father was a police officer. May he rest in peace. And I get and understand what they're going through. That's not the point. The point is that in the event that there's someone that steps out of line, we have an obligation to say so. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And if someone does something wrong, we shouldn't be protecting them. We should be saying it's wrong. We should be calling it out. We should be bringing them to justice. We should be getting justice for the people that they exact this injustice upon. And so where's the protection for the communities? Where are the people who are police officers dressed in black protecting them? I'm not castigating the entirety of law enforcement. I'm telling law enforcement that if one of your own does something wrong, you have an obligation to do something about it. You have an obligation to say something about it. You have an obligation to address it. And if you don't address it, you know what? It makes it worse. And that's why we're seeing the reaction we're seeing across the country with protesters saying we are mad as heck and we are not going to take it anymore. Enough is enough. And unless communities are respected, unless communities are policed appropriately, unless you have officers in communities who reflect the communities they serve, who are trained to understand those communities and who are engaging in force where it's appropriate, not inappropriate, it's going to get worse. And that's why we're in this position now, and it's a shame.
So let me ask you this. You said something that was very important about the responsibility of fellow officers when they see one of their own stepping out of line, that they have a responsibility. Is there not something on the books that stipulates that there's a legal duty to intervene.
You have a legal, professional, moral, ethical responsibility to do your job. We're hearing claims about an officer was only on the job for 4 days. This officer was only on the job for 3 shifts. What does that have to do with it? The fact is that you have a legal duty and obligation to actually prevent a fellow officer from killing someone. What is that?
Have we seen people move? Have attorneys, district attorneys, have they moved on that to prosecute people for failing to intervene? I mean, how widely enforced is that? Because I'm reading that Minneapolis is only now moving to ensure that that is enforced, that legal duty of fellow officers to intervene in the case of extreme or disproportionate force.
The answer is that it's not enforced at all. We have a tough enough problem in this country enforcing issues relating to the police officer himself or herself exacting all types of criminality onto someone, much less those standing around them. The problem is twofold. Twofold is the problem. One is an accountability issue. We can go back to Eric Gardner, right? And we can go back to Eric Gardner, I believe it was in 6 years ago, okay? 2014, Eric Gardner, he gets killed. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. He's dead. The officer is not even indicted. What does an indictment mean? Just so that everyone's clear. An indictment means that there's a group of people, usually 23, it varies by every state. They get together and they convene, and a majority, that's 12, right? And that varies by jurisdiction too, decide that there's enough evidence to take the case to trial. They couldn't even get an indictment on Eric Gardner, and as it related to Eric Gardner's death by Officer Pantaleo, who killed him. And so if we're not going to get an indictment, that is the district attorney convening with a grand jury to say there's enough to go to trial, how else are we going to get accountability? You had, let's fast forward, right? And then you have the Department of Justice who investigates for 5 years. 5 years. And then they say, oh, you know what? We're not moving forward. How's that accountability? And so if we're not holding the people, to your core question, Isha, we're not holding the people who are doing the violence responsible, how on earth do the people who are standing by think that they're going to be held accountable? And then just one last point on this issue, and there are many to make, but I'll leave it to one. We can look right there in Minnesota. And we saw Philando Castile in a car stop tell the officer, sir, I have a gun with me. I just want to let you know. And the officer says, well, let me have your ID. He says, okay, I just have a gun. He reaches to get his ID and he gets arrested. That officer does get indicted and prosecuted, but he's acquitted. He's found not guilty at trial. So if we want to talk about people and officers being held responsible, I mean, I would be just happy with having the officers who engage in the misconduct held responsible. If we're not holding them accountable, how are we going to hold other people around them who see it accountable? It doesn't happen enough. And until we address the issue of accountability, you do something wrong, you have to know there are consequences. You do something wrong, you're going to get fired. You do something wrong, you're going to get arrested. You do something wrong, you're going to be prosecuted. You do something wrong, you'll be convicted and go to jail. Until we can reach those issues, we're not going to get to the other issues of the simple bystander who think it's acceptable and who think it's okay. Totally inappropriate. We need to do something about accountability. And until we do, we're going to be in this place and having the same exact conversation.
So let me bring in the viewers now. They raise a point, and this is a question from Bev Archibald, such an important question. And to put in context, we have heard from Attorney General Keith Ellison saying that this is not a slam dunk, that this is a difficult case to prosecute and get the result that the community and every other person, I would think, right-thinking person wants, but I can't speak for all the right-thinking people out there. And this question by Bev Archibald, and I'm wondering whether this helps Attorney General Keith Ellison. This has been widely reported today. Bev Archibald says this: they're now saying Chauvin knew George and they had friction while working at the nightclub. Is this Chauvin trying to make up a story/defense? And we do know from the owner of that nightclub, she too has come out and said Chauvin acted very differently around people of color. And she, in a CBS special, that she was asked whether they felt Chauvin had a problem with black people. She says he seemed intimidated and afraid. Okay, that to the side, and this statement that according to a friend of George Floyd who's come out and said there was a history between these two men. Does that help the defense or does it help the prosecution? What does this piece of information mean for this case?
Okay. So with regard to that piece of information, the answer is we don't yet know. Why? Because until we investigate the nature of the relationship, the circumstances surrounding the relationship, were they friends? Were they enemies? Was there an axe to grind? Was there some pent-up hatred? Was there animus? Was there anxiety? Were they in a fight? Did it, what it involved? We're not able really to clearly comment on that. But let me comment this way to the excellent question. Let us all get on the same page regarding what he's facing with respect to charges. Now, there were calls from the community, calls from people in America that he should face a murder charge. What does that mean? Murder means, right, first degree murder, of course, means that you did something that was planned, it was premeditated. What's the significance of that? We criminalized activities in this country based upon the mental state, the mindset of the person, which that question really goes to. We just don't know what the nature of that relationship was to determine whether it could have been an intentional killing. Did he mean to do it? So I'll refrain from making a judgment. We do know that when the prosecutor moved forward, he felt, even though the community was calling for first-degree murder, planning, premeditation, that I'm not going to do first-degree murder, right? We do know also, Isha, skipping to third degree, I'll get to second degree in one moment. We do know that when he was originally prosecuted or arrested, that is Officer Chauvin, they charged with third-degree murder. What is that? Third-degree murder is murder that we call depraved heart murder. What that means in English is I act in an inhumane way. I'm causing someone some serious physical injury, and I'm acting in such an inhumane way that I have a depraved heart. And that depraved heart leads to third-degree murder. Third-degree murder is punishable by 25 years. That's what they originally charged him with. They said, you know what? We don't know if it's intentional. We don't know if it's premeditated, but we darn sure do know that he was doing something that was really serious and really wrong and had no humanity. It was depraved. We'll charge him with third degree. We also know, Isha, that that was upgraded. Now I get to second-degree murder. And people say, okay, you explain first, premeditation and planning. You explain third degree, depraved heart. What is second degree?
Yeah.
Second-degree murder is murder you engage in, which we call in this country felony murder. What am I talking about? If you are engaged in a felony, here an assault upon someone, and they die as a result of that assault, right? You don't have to intend to kill them as long as they're dead as a result of your assault. That you can charge second-degree murder, which is punishable by 40 years. And so we have to understand, and I'm trying to answer the viewer's question as thoroughly as I can, that with what he's being charged with, second-degree murder, the intent is not at issue. It doesn't matter that Chauvin didn't intend to kill him. It only matters that Chauvin was engaged in an assault, and during that assault with the knee on the neck, that's assault, he died. So unintentionally he died. So in my final analysis, and let's also remember this, the prosecutor did not drop the third-degree murder charge, the depraved heart, inhumane charge. He simply upgraded to add an additional charge of second-degree murder. So at the end of the day, it may not even matter whether or not Officer Chauvin knew him, didn't know him, how he knew him, why he knew him. I'll tell you this, though. If they determine in the course of that relationship that something was amiss, that they didn't like each other, that he had an axe to grind, you may now get to the first-degree murder that they're not charging now. You may see another upgrading in charges. It may very well be first-degree, planned, intent, premeditated. But if you take nothing out of my answer to this question, right, take this. It does not require intent. It does not require the prosecutor to show you intended to kill someone for you to get second-degree murder. As long as they could show you were engaged in a felony, the assault, and it led to someone's death unintentionally, you're guilty. And that's important at the end of the day.
And let me pick up on what you just said, and a few more questions I want to weave in. But you said the charge could get upgraded to first-degree murder. Is there any deadline by which that would have to happen in these proceedings?
There is not. Prior to trial, what happens is, and just to be clear, because the lawyers may be saying, no, you said no to a deadline. We have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. Yes, that's true. We have a Sixth Amendment right to a speedy trial and a public trial. However, as I see it here, in moving forward, in the event that newly discovered evidence comes out throughout the course of this proceeding, they will be able to safely, without any statute of limitations or any legal bar, amend the charges prior to trial to include an upgrade of first-degree murder in the event, because I don't want anyone saying, hey, that legal analyst said they were going to upgrade. I'm not saying they're going to upgrade. I'm saying if they determine in their investigation that the relationship between Chauvin and George Floyd was one of long-standing, it was a relationship where there was some hatred, some animus, some dispute, some ill will, prosecutors may say, aha, there's your intent, there's your premeditation, there's your first-degree murder, and it would give them the ability to do so, and that they can safely do so anytime prior to trial, and that's what would occur here if those facts are present.
Now, you mentioned, I mean, again, with the Pantaleo situation and Eric Garner, you know, it went to trial and the man walked. And so someone asked this question that I want to bring to you. This is from Conta M. Conde. And thank you to everyone who's writing in, everyone who's part of this conversation. We appreciate your presence today and your involvement. Conta M. Conde says, my question is this. If it's jurors that convict in the US, what is the role of judges? Because I thought it's judges that have the final say when it comes to decisions.
So let's understand, here's the way it works in our system. The way it works in our system is a judge is an umpire, right? Anybody out there, I'll use all kinds of sports analogies. If you watch baseball, you see there's an umpire behind the plate, strike one, ball one, strike two. The judge calls the ball and strikes, right? If you watch basketball, you have a referee, they blow the whistle because there's a foul, right? Or if you watch boxing, there's a referee in the ring that says no head bunting, no biting ears. What a judge does is simply preside over the case to make sure there's fairness. There are two attorneys in the courtroom. One is prosecuting, the other is defending. The judge wants to make sure that what the jury hears is admissible. That means that is proper for them to hear. And there are certain things the jury cannot hear, which a judge will rule before the jury is impaneled that they can hear. So a judge in our system is merely a referee that makes rulings on what evidence the jury will hear, what evidence the jury will not hear, what evidence will be placed before them, whether the charges are proper, whether they're legally appropriate. The judge has a rule over the law. That's what the judge's role is, a referee on issues of the law. A jury of 12 that has to vote unanimously, they decide questions of fact. It's up to the jury after hearing all the facts to render a conclusion, a determination, what we call in the United States a verdict as to whether someone's guilty or innocent. And if all 12 don't agree of the jury, then a person goes home. Okay. In the event that all 12 do agree, you have a final verdict. If one juror, just one, doesn't agree, you have what's called a hung jury. That means that jury cannot reach a conclusion and the case can be tried again. And so, by way of summation, a judge is only there to preside over the law. Jury hears it, jury doesn't. Objection, sustained. Objection, overruled. That's what a judge does. A jury determines what the facts are, and that's how we play it out in our system of justice.
This question from Cecilia Greenfode, to pick up on what you just said about juries. She said juries can be biased, right?
Well, I take it to be fair that everyone can be biased in some way or the other, but that's up to the lawyers who pick a jury. What happens in our system of justice is a whole panel of jurors come into a room, and we call them potential jurors, okay? And in that potential jury room, we call them potential jurors because they're not jurors yet, but they're in the room. You come into a courtroom, there may be 100, 200, whatever, not at the same time. They bring them in. And what happens is that they then get called to sit in the jury box. The lawyers have an opportunity to question the jurors, and the questioning will go something like this: Isha, where do you work? Who are you employed by? What do you do? How long have you done it? In this case, you're going to hear it involves significant police issues. Is there anything that would make it unfair for you to decide this case? Do you have an officer that's in your family? Tell us what you think about police and their testimony. They interview, that is, the lawyers interview the jurors. Once that interview is over, they get to decide, that is the prosecution and the defense, what jurors they want, what jurors they don't. They also, they being the lawyers, have a certain amount of challenges, meaning you could throw off a certain amount of jurors. Now, let's be clear. If a jury says, if I say, Isha, what do you think about the police? Oh, I hate the police. Not suggesting you would ever say that. Just using you as an example. I hate the police, right? You get challenged for cause. That means that you get to go home, and I challenge you for cause, and a judge would have to send you home. There are other challenges, and you can have a 4-cause challenge. They're unlimited. If 200 people came in the jury room and all of the 200 said, we hate police, they would all get sent home. And that tries to eliminate some of the bias, okay? In the event, though, that there's someone who says they can be fair and reasonable, and both lawyers agree, that juror gets put on to the jury. So I'm not saying it's a perfect system. I'm not saying that some people sneak through. I'm not saying that you're going to get a jury that's completely fair. All I'm saying is our system of justice allows for the questioning of jurors, allows for jurors who have potential biases to be weeded out and excused, allows, if they do have those biases, for them to be challenged for cause, and also other jurors, we call it a peremptory challenge. That means we can challenge a juror, for any reason or no reason, as long as it's not discriminatory. I may not like the vibe I get from that juror. They didn't say anything that really was against my client or against my case. I just didn't like the way they looked at me. I didn't get a good vibe. I didn't like the way they answered questions. I don't like the fact that they said they could be fair to police, but their son or daughter was a police officer. Something that allows me to challenge them. You get a certain amount of them. And so our system goes through great pains. It's not a perfect system, but it goes through great pains at trying to get a fair, decent, reasonable, and unbiased jury.
So let me ask you this. This is from Abdurrahman Lamin. He says, do you think the jury system also needs to be reformed as part of a broader call for justice?
I think that the whole system needs to be reformed, but I do think that, and I'm not suggesting, again, I think I've said a number of times that it's an imperfect system, but I think that the fact that you have jurors who we can question, right? In the many, many trials that I've done and had, as a prosecutor and as a defense attorney, I get to say, hello, Madame Juror, let me ask you a few questions. And I have a limited amount of time. The judge doesn't give me all day and all night, right? There's a certain amount of time that the judge gives, but they give equal time to me and to my adversary. So it's not like my adversary gets an hour and a half and I get a half an hour. That would be unfair. To the extent that we both attorneys, the prosecutor and people like me who defend, get equal time to question the jury, to the extent that we both, the prosecutor and the defense, have the ability to challenge, kick off jurors, to the extent that we both have the ability to get a feel and a sense for who the jurors are, to the extent that the jurors are part of our Constitution, right? And they're able to sit, you're able to have a jury trial. I think it's a system that, certainly is far, far, far from perfect, but a system that works as well as it could under the circumstances. Having said that, there have been states who have attempted to try to move to a system of having 11 jurors to 1 reach a verdict, right? And the court has held, the Supreme Court has held that is not appropriate and that it has to be unanimous. So it's a system really designed to favor the defendant. And here's what you'll hear a lot in law. It is better to let 100 guilty people go free than to convict 1 innocent person. And that's why we have all 12 jurors have to agree, and the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Not beyond every and all doubt, not beyond a scientific certainty, not a mathematical, they definitely, surely, 100% did it. The standard of proof is a high one, beyond a reasonable doubt. So we figure in our system, if all 12 come to a conclusion and all 12 meet that standard, that it's good enough. And so therefore, I think that it's working as it was intended to work.
Okay, so let me ask you this: as you make that point, rather to see 99 guilty people go free than 1 innocent person put away, but we know, and this ties back into the whole jury bias and the entire system. We know in the criminal justice system, and we look at death row, and we look at the number of cases that come up for review, the Innocence Project, and all of these endeavors, which show time and time again that it's not just the odd person, most times the odd black or brown person. That seems to dominate the headlines. I'm sure there are white people who are wrongly convicted as well. But by and large, we see time and time again notable numbers of black and brown people who were wrongly convicted. I mean, the system is not working for black and brown people all too often. Not all the time, but Joey, talk to me about that as we talk about bias and reform and what the system is doing to black and brown people.
So I would love to, but I think that we have to, in having that conversation, Isha, understand that that's not an issue that's limited to the jury. Do jurors convict people wrongly every day and twice on Sunday? I'll be the first to tell you that jurors don't get it right. But when you look at the
sentencing, when it comes to the judges, right?
right. I mean, and judges have biases, and judges potentially, and I hate to say that, but some judges favor the prosecutors, other judges may be more favorable to a defendant. People are people. They're human beings. It's not like they put on a black robe and all of a sudden they become robots who have no likes, no dislikes. It's not like that. So there are biases. But it's important when we have the conversation with respect to reform and reforming our system that we don't just limit it to juries, right? Mm-hmm. We know in this country there's a disproportionate amount of people of color who are being held to a different standard, who are being arrested more, who are being prosecuted more, who are being convicted more. But that starts way before you get your jury trial. Who are the police arresting? Whose communities are the police policing? Who's getting the more aggressive policing? Who's being given a pass based upon an officer's discretion, and who's not getting the benefit of the doubt and being arrested? That goes way deeper, meaning reforms in our system. It goes way deeper than, a jury got it wrong. The jury is making a decision based upon the people who they're adjudicating, right? But the people, in order for them to get through that pipeline, you got to go to the beginning of the pipeline. And I think that beginning of the pipeline starts with hiring police officers, training police officers, getting officers that reflect the communities that they serve racially, ethnically, religiously, what have you. Having officers that can relate to the community, having officers understand the community, having officers appropriately trained so that they don't have all of these biases that they have. And again, we're having this discussion. I'm being candid. I'm not suggesting the world is horrific. Police officers are these mean-spirited people looking to arrest people for no reason. I'm suggesting that there are problems in the system. I want to tell you that again, and I'll reiterate, I salute officers who are out there on the streets having a difficult time, working hard for themselves and their families, protecting communities, being fair to communities, being just to the communities, being loving to communities, doing the right thing by communities. We get that. But we also know that there's an element that don't do that. That's what I'm talking about. They need to be called out, and we need to have that reform. And so what I'm saying is, if we get to the pipeline that goes to a jury, we have to address the beginning of the pipe. And that beginning of the pipe starts with the officers who are actually making the arrest to introduce you to the system, to get you arrested, to get you prosecuted, to get you indicted, to get you before, the whole grand jury, and then ultimately a jury trial, in which case, bingo, there you go. And the jurors are making those decisions. So we have to talk, if we're going to talk about reform, we have to talk about from soup to nuts. Final thing on the issue, with respect to this question, glad to answer however many more. It starts with accountability. And on the issue of policing, if police know that you can basically over-police communities with impunity, no consequence, that you can beat someone, no consequence, that you can mace someone, no consequence, that you can kill someone, I'm not going to get indicted, I'm not going to get arrested, I'm not going to get prosecuted. If I do, I'm going to get acquitted. It's going to keep happening. You need to deter them. And I think what we're seeing now in this country, to bring in the broader discussion as it relates to the protests, as it relates to all we're seeing going on and communities being so upset, is they want police accountability. Don't take 4 days to arrest me. Take 1 day. Don't take 9 days. Take an hour. And so the bottom line is that if we have that accountability and police start getting held to the same standard as everyone else, hopefully they'll be like, okay, I get it. If I do something wrong, I'm going to get arrested too. If I do something wrong, I'm going to get fired too. And if we can get that accountability, I think it'll go a long way on this issue of reforming the pipeline, addressing their conduct, and achieving justice in this country, which is long overdue.
So let me ask you about the calls to defund the police. And it seems as if they're yet to really clarify, do they mean defund, do away with them, or take some of that money, keep the police, but take some of that money and put it in community programming? I think the people who are calling for that not everybody has clarified what they specifically mean by that. But one thing that is clear is people are saying we need something different, which you yourself have said. And there's all this talk about bringing back community policing, community safety programs. And this is a question from Khadija Brown. She says, maybe bring back community policing. How is that different from what we have now? Help us understand that as you interpret that. Or is it merely, as you just said, having police that reflect the community that they are? policing that they have charge over. What do you see as some of the models for a different type of policing from other places in the world, from other states, other communities that you think would be more effective?
Sure. So excellent question, and here's the answer. Let's start with and there are different layers in the question, each of which are excellent, and I thank you for them, Khadijah Brown. So listen, number one, as it relates to the issue of defunding the police. And it does mean certain things, and it creates a visceral reaction. I was asked about this when I was on air. I got the worst, response. You don't know what you're talking about. Defunding doesn't mean taking away their money. It just means this. Listen, defunding the police is a practical matter. Let's start with the issue of whether it means, because it means different things apparently to different people, and apparently I don't know what it means yet either. But if it means taking away a police department, I think it's ill-advised. We have to work on solutions that have people feel safe in their communities, that have police who police communities with professionalism, with courtesy, with respect. We have to bring that back. And so my answer would be, if it meant defunding police entirely, I don't think we're ready for that yet. I think we need the police. We need a better, more trained, more equipped police force, more respectful police force, a less aggressive police force. We can have those debates. But if the funding means getting rid of the police, I think it's a time that has not yet come, and I would not be supportive of that. If the funding means looking at the distribution of resources and how they could be made better, I'm open to the conversation. I think the funding has this loaded meaning. What do you mean defund the police? That's the reaction. If defunding means, Aisha, as you suggested, all right, so let's look at perhaps the budget. We can redistribute that money. Instead of buying more guns, we can redistribute it into communities for educational programs with the youth, right? We can redistribute it into businesses within the community, for purposes of allowing businesses to join with clergy and other members in the community to develop safety programs. I'm all for whether money should be spent in a wise way. I think we should spend money and could spend money in a way that's more constructive to communities as opposed to destructive to communities. So if defunding police means we have to look for ways to design in communities where money could be more appropriately spent and more constructively spent, I'll have that conversation. But certainly defunding meaning it's over, I'm not willing to have that conversation at this time. Moving on to other layers of your question as it relates to community policing, right? Yeah. So community policing, what does that mean? It means you have officers who are working in communities that they know, that they trust, that they understand, and who know and trust and understand them. Boy, is it nice to walk in a community where a police officer knows the kids in the street because he sees them every day, knows the kids who are playing in the park, and knows that, they may wear their pants a certain way, but that's Jerry. That's Miss Jones's kid. He's a sweetheart. The fact that he might wear his hair in cornrows or braids or whatever, that shouldn't define a person. But what I'm saying is, if you have an officer who knows the community, who knows the people, who works with the clergy, the religious leaders, who works with the business leaders, who understands what they're doing, what they're getting into, and who has more of a sense of what's what and who's who, I think you'll see less violence. It's when you get officers who come into communities that they distrust, that they're scared of, that they think, oh my God, his hair's a certain way, his pants is a certain way, he has an earring, the earring's in his nose. Oh, what can I do? I think that leads to problems because that really reinforces stereotypes. So we have to get back to a model of policing where they know the neighborhoods and they could really reflect the neighborhoods and they could proportionately understand the neighborhoods, right? There should be more people who look like the neighborhoods they're serving, who come from the neighborhoods they're serving. And so if we get back to that model, as opposed to a model of let's occupy a community, then it's a better situation. Last point, and that's this on the issue. I think this all relates to another issue called de-escalation, right? Officers should de-escalate a situation. Aisha, look, I've known you for a long time. When I see you, you have the warmest smile. You make others smile around you because you're a positive person. You're a good person. You're just a wonderful spirit to be around. Why do I say that? Because if you have officers in communities who are tamping and ramping down the level of aggression, who are there not to shout, not to yell and to shout, to stick and to knife and to shoot, but to be like, all right, I got you, relax. I think people will be more at at ease with what they're dealing with. You know, it takes a second for something to combust. Each of us who are out there listening to this know in your personal life, right? One response begets another response. If you approach someone, you smile at the person. You unarm them. They feel comfortable. They're good. If you're aggressive towards them, it's human nature to be aggressive back. And so all I'm saying is, I'm not saying that police is lovey-dovey. It's not that kind of a profession. What I'm saying, though, is one response begetting another response. Perhaps the first response should not be violence and escalation. The first response should be, how should I look to tamp and ramp down this issue so that we can have a peaceful solution, so that mace doesn't have to be sprayed, my stick doesn't have to come out, the taser doesn't have to be used, shots don't have to be fired. And let me finally say this. I'm not suggesting, again, because I want to make perfectly clear what I'm saying. Oh, he said that police were bad in the country and they beating people up and they macing. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we have officers out there who are doing a wonderful job every day. And I will tell you that I salute them, and I will remind you my father was one of them. But what I will say is, we have to get to issues involving bad police. We have to call them out. We have to do something about it. We have to say something about it. And we have to get officers from day one on the force. And if they don't deserve a shield, a gun, right, then and so ultimately, that's what I'm saying. And that's what I think will go a long way to bringing justice to communities.
We're so lucky to have you with us today, Joey. This question from, I just moved it. It's here it is. It's about the police reform bill. And the question was really how, I'm getting to it now. So many questions have come in since I looked away from my screen all of 2 minutes ago. So it's from Abdulrahman Lamin, who's asking essentially whether this police reform bill that we're hearing them talk about on Capitol Hill has got any chance of success if we don't get to the root of here it is. Do you think that police reform by itself will work in the long term without addressing the long-standing socioeconomic inequalities in American society? Abdul, thank you for that question.
The answer in short is that I don't. I think the way you address economic disparities, first and foremost, is by treating people like human beings. You know, it's interesting because I was asked a question, Aisha, and again, there's no perfect, I don't have a monopoly on wisdom. I just have a point of view. There's so many other points of views that are, equally compelling or perhaps even more compelling than mine. That's fine. I don't claim to know everything and be everything. I claim to have an opinion about matters of significance. But I was asked a question about, what do you teach your son? What values do you instill? What do you think this is all about? And I answer it very simply. The first thing is I said, you know what? I teach him the value of being a decent human being, of being honorable, of treating people courteously and respectfully, whether they're people who bring you coffee or who sign your paycheck, right? Be kind and decent and kind to people. Value people, no matter they're white, black, yellow, Chinese, orange, whoever they are. Just give them your courtesy, give them your respect. And I think that's what, in terms of economic equality, and I know it's a lot deeper than that. I get it. Believe me, I'm not suggesting it ends there. But I'm suggesting in interactions with people, because they may not dress as nice as you, as good as you, look as good, be a different color, treat people with respect. That's what I tell my son. Second point, just because you treat people with respect doesn't mean they're going to treat you with respect. Don't be bitter about it, right? Because then you're as bad as they are. Don't, because the person who happened to be a different color disrespected you, say, well, everybody in that category disrespected you. Rise above it and understand that you're going to have small-minded people. Don't allow it to make you small-minded. And third, of course, is with regard to my teachings, comply now, grieve later. People interact with police and they know or believe that the interaction was just so terrible that they were treated unjustly or unfairly. It's not the time to raise that issue in the street. Raise it later, right? Because you're never going to win. The person has a badge and a gun. So all I'm saying on the issue of economic and, and distinctions and inequality, that's going to happen. But I think it starts with respecting each other, talking to each other, understanding each other. When you see somebody who has their knee on somebody's neck for that amount of time, that goes to show me that that's a total lack of respect. It's a total lack of judgment. It's a total lack of humanity. Who taught you to become that way? There's some things that happen, Aisha, that you're like in your worst day, you wouldn't even think about doing something like that. So how do you get to that point? And so I just think that we can do a lot more with economic inequality. We can talk about schools and education all day. We can talk about housing and the development of housing. We could talk about so many other broader issues in communities. But I think there's one issue that doesn't require a law to pass, doesn't require Congress to pass a bill, doesn't require state legislatures to pass a bill. It's about being respectful, decent human beings to one another. And if you can do that, maybe you could de-escalate the situation. Everybody lives, and you might just leave that situation saying, you know what, that cop was a pretty good dude, or she was a really nice officer, and your opinion of all of them might be heightened as opposed to aggression. And so a little courtesy goes a long way. Just smile.
I want to bring this in because this question, really it's a statement here by Utib Got at, Utib Got 8, I hope I'm saying that correctly. And really, I get what he's saying, but I also want to broaden it out to just where we are right now and the hard history, the painful history, the hard facts that this country has to grapple with. He says, basically points out that you hadn't touched on the history of the police and how at its core it was a slave catching machine and how it evolved from Jim Crow and segregation. And how does that fit into the conversation now? You know, in essence, acknowledging the kind of racist roots of the police and acknowledging where we are today in this moment where people have to grapple with all of it before we can make change. I mean, how do you see it?
I think it's a great point. And, you know, there are all types of opinions out there. I respect them. And I'm grateful for the limited time we have to express my point of view about them. And yes, we could talk about the history of policing in the police department, not only as it relates to, you know, what the viewer has pointed out, but as it relates to perhaps the police, not perhaps, but without question, the police not reflecting the communities they're serving, not having enough people of color who can empathize and sympathize, and more importantly, understand the communities that they're serving. That's all important. But understanding history is critical if you're going to change the dynamic moving forward, because you understand what the pitfalls are and pitfalls have been. Mm-hmm. And what I would say to that viewer is that we are at a critical moment in our history now. And yes, we can examine and should examine and acknowledge and understand where we came from and where we've been. But we have to use that to determine where we can go and how it's going to make us better. And if we do that, then we're going to get somewhere. So we at this time have to think about where we're going to go to get better. What are we going to do to be better? And I would suggest to you that there's 3 things that we could do now in analyzing that history and seeing how moving forward we could protect people who are being abused at the hands of police. Number 1, I've already talked about it, accountability. Don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think it deserves repeating. Officers have to know and understand, because it stems from a culture of violence, a culture and a history, if we want to talk about history, of not holding police accountable, of them not being arrested, of them not being prosecuted, and those who are prosecuted walking away with impunity to do it again. So we have to make them accountable. Those who are doing things, they don't get suspended, they don't lose vacation days, they don't get disciplined. We got to fire them so they're gone. That'll change the culture. After you move from the accountability issue, which is critical, let's talk about transparency. Let's talk about stop the cover-up. Stop with these reports that talk about they were resisting and therefore I had to beat them with a stick. They were resisting and that's why I had to spray them with mace. They were resisting. You know, it was so sad, Aisha, and I don't know who the viewers saw this, but in Buffalo, there was an older gentleman who had stopped the police. He was pushed to the ground, hit his head, and went to the hospital. The police report said that he tripped and fell. Really? Yeah. Really? Yeah. He tripped and fell? No, he didn't trip and fell. You pushed him and he fell and he cracked.
And you left him there.
And you
kept moving.
And you left him there and kept it pushing. That's not the transparency we need. That's not the activity we need. And finally, Aisha, on the point, you know, to the very good question about the historical underpinnings of the police and the meaning, I think we have to move to an area of reform. And it's fine that Washington wants to pass crime bills. I think crime bills start in all of these communities, locally, and ordinances, etc. I spoke to our Speaker of the New York State Assembly yesterday, and he was very heartened by the fact that his conference, they were passing police reform bills that made a chokehold illegal in New York State. that made it more transparent with respect to knowing officers' histories with regard to who else that they've encountered and who else they may have abused, and doing a number of other things. Why do I raise that issue? New York State is one state of 50 states in the country. But if we can be the leader in that and have other states follow suit and have other localities follow suit, we will go a long way to reforming and a long way from the history that viewer spoke to, and so that we can be in a better place so that we could address people now in what we're doing and address them responsibly and have police protect and serve communities and not abuse them.
That was such a great point. I also want to add that UT is a woman. She's female. I said he. She's like, I'm a female. I'm like, okay, sorry about that, as I refer to her as a male. Thank you for the important question about history, UT, and how we need to acknowledge it. I mean, like, Joe, we only have a few minutes left, so let me just ask you, as this case goes forward, and we didn't even get to talk about Breonna Taylor, which I'm so sorry about because it's such an important case, and Black women who die at the hands of police, the cases don't seem to stay in the minds of people for as long. Or, you know, we talked about Sandra Bland, and it's not that it doesn't make headlines, but it's different. And we didn't get to talk about Breonna Taylor, so I hope we can talk about that in the future. But when you look at what lies ahead, having the Breonna Taylor case out there, the Ahmaud Arbery case out there, the George Floyd, all of these front and center, I mean, what is your expectation for how quickly we will see meaningful change?
So change is incremental, and change comes at a pace, and generally that pace is too slow. There are moments, Aisha, of opportunity. There are moments in history that demand and call for action. Now is such a moment. We're at a moment where people recognize and understand that something's wrong. And, you know, the people you mentioned, and I know it pains you that we didn't get to those other cases because of who you are and what you stand for. But it doesn't mean that in George Floyd, we're not talking about all of them anyway, because the same issues we're seeing, it shouldn't have happened. It did not need to happen. It could have been done better. It could have been done differently. Police could have acted differently. Circumstances could have really not played out in the way that they played out. And so if we're going to move to the place we need to, we need to have this moment in time, really, of reflecting and thinking about, okay, George Floyd is dead. What would his legacy be, and what should it be? And I would suggest to you that his legacy should be, you know what? The time for change has come. The time for change is now. We have to reform our system of justice. We have to reform police departments across this country with regard to the tactics that they're using, the measures they're using, with regard to de-escalation, with regard to whether they should hold and have a gun in the first place, with regard to how they reflect in the communities that they're serving as it relates to community policing, etc. We have a moment. And I think people are on board at this moment. We elect people in this country every day at the local level to serve us in municipalities. We elect people to serve us in cities. We elect people to serve as our state representatives and our federal representatives. The mood that they can act upon now is one upon urgency. People get it, and they want it to be different. And I think if we could pass measures and reforms moving forward to hold police accountable, I think we would go a long way. But beyond that, it's a culture. And it's a culture that really needs to be changed. And if we have a culture where police stop saying someone tripped and fell, and you know what? You did something, it was wrong, I'm going to do something about it, that would be favorable. If we can have a culture that says, you know what, officer, I know you used your gun, it wasn't proper, but you're going to be held accountable, as opposed to, it's okay, we're not going to prosecute you, things will change. I think attitudes are changing, beliefs are changing, views are changing, society's changing, and the message on this issue is changing. And if we can do that, I think George Floyd's legacy would be so important, as would the legacies of all the people you mentioned before, Aisha, from Sandra Bland, from Breonna Taylor, you know, you name it, and others that have been impacted negatively by the police. We can change the narrative, and we can have a better system moving forward.
Yeah, amen to that. Joe Jackson, we feel so incredibly blessed and fortunate to have had an hour with you. Thank you for being so generous with your time and always being so kind to me. Thank you. Thank you for answering all the questions. And we look forward to welcoming you back again soon. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Aisha. God bless you.
God bless. Take care. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of you who stayed with us for the hour and listened to Joey share his brilliance and his insight. We'll be back again with another show tomorrow. But before we go, I want to give you a quick check of the numbers of coronavirus cases on the continent in Africa. You know that's what we always do here. That is one of our key focuses. At last check, for total confirmed numbers, there were 204,457 total cases. We've gone over that 200,000 mark. In terms of active cases, 107,213, and number of deaths gone over the 5,000 mark, 5,561. So total confirmed cases on the continent, 204,457. The active number, 107,213, and we've gone over 5,000 deaths. Thank you for the time you spent with us today. I hope you got a lot out of it. Every Wednesday we do this here, Deep Dive Wednesday. We go behind the headlines and really examine the story and the issues underpinning it. Thank you for your time. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, same place. Till then, be safe, everyone. Take care. Bye for now.